All right.
All right, cool. Well, thanks for having us on this October edition of the chat. Greg had asked if Greg Turgeon and I could talk about our trip to the Atacama Desert, which was a couple of years in planning to get this kind of trip of a lifetime for, I think, both of us. I think Greg's already thinking about when we can get back there within
Yep.
the next year if our wives don't kill us first. But so we're just going to kind of go over what we did while we were in Chile, and then some of the tips and tricks we learned from being there. And feel free to ask us questions. I'm not sure how many in the group have actually been there, but it was an amazing experience for us, and I hope we get you guys excited about wanting to go visit this amazing country one day. So I'm just going to minimize all this so we can hop right in. All right, so when Greg had approached us, he just kind of wanted to talk about the trip, and I thought about, because this is a group of astrophotographers, we talk about some of the shooting techniques that we used while we were down there, as well as the gear we built, because I think a lot of us are gearheads, and you know the goals that Greg and I had when taking this trip, we didn't want to waste time when we were there. After traveling, halfway around the world, we wanted to make the most of every single night that we had. And so we outlined several of the goals we had for each leg of the trip. We first started out in Obstec, so we'll talk about that piece of it. And then we went further north into the Atacama Desert outside of San Pedro de Atacama. And then, like I said, we'll talk about some of the new shooting techniques that we learned from the members of our group, as well as just from each other. This was only the second time that Greg and I had actually met in person, and it's funny how much you actually just learn from your friends just by sitting out under the stars and talking about what you do when you're out there and what things we can try, and how to be a little creative. And then specifically some of the programs that we were using, like PT GUI to stitch our massive mosaic, using the ASI air and polar alignment in the southern hemisphere is no joke. And so talk about how the ASI air really kind of helped that out. So planning the trip, this was 2+ years in the making for us. It just so happened that Greg and I had been talking over Instagram about Matt Dietrich from Planewave Instruments. I don't know if any of you guys have had the pleasure of working with him, but Matt's a real great guy that I've known for a couple of years through Planewave and through my association at Kit Peak. I get to play golf with him whenever he comes out to Tucson to do an install of Planewave telescopes and all that. But we were talking and seeing all these amazing pictures that Matt was posting from the Southern Hemisphere, from Obstec and Chile. And Greg actually has a telescope down there. You want to tell him quickly about your telescope, Greg, and your setup?
Yeah. So I had originally planned to try to get down to Obstec in March of 2020, and then I'm sure we can all figure out why that trip was canceled. Luckily, I had been procrastinating buying a plane ticket, as Casey can imagine, and so I didn't have to refund that. But so I set up my CDK 17 down at Obstec. It's been down there since 2020, and I didn't have a chance to get down there and actually see it in person until this trip. So that was a pretty special experience, being able to walk into that building and finally see this thing, because I had been trying to get down there for so long. But that was pretty exciting, and so it's still running down there. And our plan was to put a wide field rig on top of the 17, which we did.
Yeah, and so Greg had actually bought this entire rig and had it shipped down to Chile because of the import taxes, and getting gear down there is absolutely insane. And so he'd never actually seen this big telescope that he bought, which I thought was a crying shame. And so when we saw that Matt Dietrich had put up a workshop in the Atacama Desert, we're like, hey, we should really go on this. And while we're there, let's extend the trip a couple of days, either on the front end or the back end, and actually go see your telescope. I would love to see the observatory. It was near Cerro Tololo and Cerro Pachon, where the CTIO is. So we just decided, hey, let's do this. Let's just book it. And so we booked it. And, it was just about 2 years before the trip actually left that we put the deposit down with Matt. And then we started like planning what we were going to do and trying to coordinate travel plans, because Greg's actually from the land up north in Canada, and I'm down here in Tucson with you guys. So trying to coordinate how we were all going to get there and bring all this gear that we wanted, as well as, our wide field rig that Greg had mentioned, how we were going to get that into Chile without having to pay exorbitant import taxes as well, because Greg did that once and he never wants to do that again, I'm sure.
Nope.
So once we built this, I personally, this is kind of speaking from my side, I had serious fear of missing out on this trip because, like I mentioned, this was really a once in a lifetime trip for me. I think now on the back end, it might not be a once in a lifetime, like I mentioned. Like, I think we definitely want to go back there sometime because the skies were absolutely insane, which we'll kind of talk about. But like we said, we had this 70 millimeter stellar view from my friend Steve, who's I partner with at another observatory in Texas. And it was just kind of sitting around. And I was like, hey, what if we just throw this on top of your CDK? And, whenever we have downtime on it, or, there's a new moon out, and we just want to shoot one night with a wide field rig, we can do that. And so this is a picture that we got after we finished installing the 70-inch or 70 millimeter. I wish it was a 70-inch on top of Greg's telescope down there at Chile at OBSTEC. And it took us only about 2-3 hours. We brought this rig in my backpack. And so it's a ASI 2600 color camera, again, with that 70 millimeter stellar view with an autofocuser on it. And we have found out from shooting with that rig that we can actually shoot simultaneously with the CDK-17 and the 70 millimeter without losing any frames to dithering. And so we are just using it opportunistically as it's pointing at a cool target. Greg just powers on a separate instance of Nina and runs that telescope. So back to like the gear that we actually brought for the trip for the wide field astrophotography. Almost every piece of gear that I brought was new because I sat down to start to think about what I was going to bring. And I was like, oh, it would be really cool if I had this. Or, this was right around the same time the ZWO AM5 came out. And I'm like, this is a great portable mount. Like, I should really bring this. I had gotten a Skywatcher GTI, which I ended up taking as well because I was afraid of missing out. And so Greg and I actually had an exact matched rig where we had 2 Rokinon 135s, 2 ASI 2600 colors, 2 AM5s, all run by the ASI Air. And the reason we decided to get this one matched rig is we felt that we wanted to get this really, really massive mosaic of the core of the Milky Way. Because at the time of year that we were there in August, the core was literally right over our head right when the sun set. So we're like, okay, let's build similar rigs. We can share data, have these great rigs running the entire time. And then we both ended up getting Sigma 40 millimeter art lenses for mosaic landscape shots. And then we both either brought a 14 or a 20 millimeter lens for our wide field rig. But because of the way that we booked the flights and everything, LATAM Airlines, if you guys ever travel with LATAM Airlines, make sure you upgrade your ticket to, I think it was like the premier version of the ticket, because later on you can't add a bag. So we were only allowed one bag and one carry-on item. And so we had to fit all this in our backpacks. And so we waited when we were there. I think my backpack weighed about 44 pounds and Greg's was about 40, all loaded onto, carrying through the Chilean airports and going from North America down to South America. So next time we'll just pay the little bit extra to get like a checked bag, I think. But here's a couple.
It was heavy, man.
Yeah. I think the first day our backs were kind of broken after we got there. So these were just pictures of the rigs that we built. Like I said, on the left-hand side, we had the Sigma 40 millimeters. I bought a Canon RA that I happened to get from a friend on Instagram to get some wide field shots with a little ASI Mini and the Skywatcher GTI. we both had the AM5s with the Rokinons, and then this was in the middle shot. This was at the edge of Obstec, where we're sitting on this overhang that looked out over the valley, which was absolutely beautiful. And this was the first night. We got there probably around like mid-afternoon, and we set up like 6 different rigs just to run all night. And they had these really cool camp chairs that we could just stargaze with.
They brought
So
out, if you just go back, they brought out those reclining camping chairs for us to just, Casey and I, once our rigs were running, we laid them back completely, and just the amount of details we could see just in the core straight above us was unreal. But they were so helpful too at Obstec, because we're like, hey, do you mind if we are running our rigs here for a few nights, and if, as long as we're not obviously shining any lights. And then they brought us extension cords out, and we had the perfect little setup there, which was great. In the building that you can see right behind us, they were setting up, what were they setting up there, Casey? They were setting up like 20.
it was 20 of the Rasa, or not Rasa, the Plane Wave Delta Row 20 inches, which I have a picture of. I'll show you guys in a little bit.
20 brand new of them for a university from Korea, is that right?
Yeah.
So we got to go in there and check it out.
Yeah, we'll talk about the observatories and the sky conditions we had, but like I said, once we figured out that we were going to be there for a total of 10 nights, we kind of outlined the goals that we had for this trip. And I've taught workshops at Kit Peak for a number of years, and this is something that I always encourage my students to do. Is like, when you're going somewhere, make sure you plan everything out, and you have contingencies, and you have backups, and you have certain goals in mind, because you don't want to waste the time that you spent and the funds that you spent to get to this remote installation, and then figure out you don't have a battery, or you run out of targets to shoot because you have unprecedented clear skies, which we actually did. So our goals specifically for this trip was to install that wide field rig at Obstec, because that was the first 3 days of our trip. We wanted to do a 42 panel mosaic of the Milky Way, which we ended up expanding to 62 panels because we had, like I said, unprecedented clear skies. Every single night that we were in Chile, it was clear. So we shot 10 for 10 nights that we were there. So by day 5, we had acquired all of the data that we were going to do on the original mosaic. So we just said, heck with it. And I went ahead and just expanded it using just my rig, while Greg went on to shoot some other stuff, like this beautiful 9-panel mosaic he did of the Rho Ophiuchus and the blue horsehead shot. Some other things we wanted to do were dome shots, which I'll have Greg explain when we get to that. We really obviously wanted epic Milky Way shots, because that's what we were going down there for. The core was literally at the zenith right when the sun set, and it didn't set until about 2 o'clock in the morning. So we just had a lot of variety in the different kinds of Milky Way shots that we could get. We wanted to get those arcing Milky Way mosaics that are very, very popular out on social media nowadays. And so we had gotten those lens specifically to do that. And then we also, because we were in Chile, we wanted to get some unique Chilean landscapes as part of our wide field Milky Way shots. So I'm going to turn it over to Greg to talk a little bit about Obstec, because he also is a renter at Obstec. And so if you want to just jump in and talk about our experience there.
Yes. It was pretty unique getting there. It's definitely, imagine out in the middle of nowhere, you pass the last possible little town until you go through this winding mountain road, and at the very top is the observatory. It was a lot bigger than Casey and I had anticipated. I think we thought it was a couple buildings. There is, how many buildings are there, Casey? There's
12
buildings. Yeah.
Yeah, they're building 3 more too.
Yeah, so it's really expanding, but so beautiful there. The picture there on the left actually is a little porch built on the outside of a shipping container that they've made into a little place for one person to stay. There's a bed and a desk. It was great, and you're right by the observatories. The only other place there to sleep is they have a kitchenette area and a little living room connected to one of the first observatory buildings. and up above there's a couple mattresses. That's where Casey and I spent the first night. But as you can see, just that's kind of my dream vacation spot right there, is just staying in a little shipping container in the middle of nowhere. Had some clouds during the day that would come in, but like Casey said, every night the clouds burnt away, which was pretty amazing because I watched the weather there constantly, and I was pretty terrified because I kept messaging Casey because it was probably clouds for 3 weeks leading up to that. And I was thinking to myself, we're going to be clouded out, and somehow everything just worked out. Picture on the right there is where that South Korea University is building that huge setup there. I can't even imagine how much that would be worth. We were watching those guys put that together there.
Yeah.
You got more pictures there, Bob Stick?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, this observatory they're building is for space situational awareness, but they had literally 20 of the brand new Delta Rho 500s. And so we got to see the first production model be put on, which was really cool if, you're an equipment nerd like us. So here's some of the pictures that we got from OBSTEC.
This is that on the left-hand side there, one of the guys working at OBSTEC, we were kind of wondering, like, hey, is there some cool landscape that we can use? And just down from the observatory was this really cool tree standing all by itself. So to the right, following up that hill and that tree, is where the observatory is. And I think around us there was maybe a little farm a ways away, and other than that, that was it. Those are the kind of pictures you can get exposing the Milky Way for what, 30 seconds, Casey?
Not even that. I think these were like 15-second subs.
15-second subs.
Yeah,
you can see the middle
single
picture
shot
there that Casey put together. On the top horizon there, you can see part of OBSTEC. And then the LMC, SMC with the Milky Way stretching across. This is what, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but he used that software PT GUI to put that together. It was pretty cool too, because you can see the LMC, SMC there on the top right, rising throughout the night. And I don't know if any of you had the chance to see it in person, but they're from OBSTEC, at least. They were really, really easy to see. I think a little easier than I thought they would be in person. And just seeing the dark dust lanes from OBSTEC, I haven't been too many places. I've been to Hawaii, I've been to Arizona and some other spots, but I can say that OBSTEC was probably the best skies I've ever seen before. What about you, Casey?
Yeah, so one of the really cool things, and I'll kind of highlight this one in the middle. This was just directly overhead from horizon to horizon, and every night that we were in OBSTEC, we were so far south where OBSTEC is. I think it's at 33 degrees south, that the LMC and the SMC this is where they rose, and they kind of were circumpolar, so they were in the sky the entire night. And it was just, I mean, for both of us, I think it was mind-boggling that these two satellite galaxies are just sitting there, and you could actually see with your eyes the bar in the LMC and some of the wispy outer arms around it. And like you said, with the Milky Way right at zenith, like you could see the Pipe Nebula, you could see M16, M20, you could see the Coalsack, you could see Eta Carina down on the horizon. Like, I've been to a couple of dark sites, but like there was nothing like the skies there. And like a couple of the guys, some of my other friends are on, like Steve Timmons, I actually called him that night, and I was like so excited about how amazing the skies were. And I think I went on about it for like 20 minutes and then had to hang up and run outside and go see it again. But I mean, like the dark river coming off of Ophiuchus over here, we could see that with our naked eye. And that's just something I never thought that I would be able to see, that and the southern, the LMC and SMC. So we'll talk about how we took a couple of these shots, but the two over here on the right were with that Sigma 40 millimeter lens and the Canon RA. So each one is only 2 hours with 5-minute subs from OBSTEC. And like I said, the skies there were some of the most transparent, clear skies I've ever seen. It's actually funny, in Atacama further north, they actually had the best seeing I think we've ever seen, but the transparency wasn't there. We'll kind of talk about that actually right now. So after spending 3 days in Obstec and seeing some of the best skies we've ever seen, we got on a plane. We packed up at like 4 a.m. It was kind of funny too, because we're packing all our gear up like as the sun was getting ready to rise, and we saw Orion upside down, which was a total trip to see. Like, I knew intellectually it was like that, but to see it yourself was crazy. Um, but anyways, we were there in OPSEC for 3 days. We got on the plane and went up to Calama Airport and drove an hour and a half out to San Pedro de Atacama, which is where we held the workshop. And San Pedro de Atacama is a fairly famous tourist spot in the middle of the Atacama Desert. It's this small town that's just like out in the middle of nowhere, and you wouldn't think it by looking around, but it's one of the coolest like foodie towns that I've ever been to. The food there, like everywhere you went, were like 5-star restaurants, and it was just amazing cuisine everywhere. The town was really cool. We had like this mosaic, or not mosaic, just this wall mural that we drove by the restaurants every day. Sorry, let me go back. And of course, my computer wants to freeze. So we were with this group. We had 6 individuals, and this is Matt Diederich, who taught the workshop. And it was great meeting, other individuals from around the world that kind of shared the same passion that we did. And so Greg and I are over here. And then we had our friend Thomas, who had attended one of my workshops at Kip Peak, that found out I was going and wanted to go. And then the 3 ladies were from the East Coast. But, every night we got to go into town and have an early dinner and then head back and get all of our gear set up right in time for astronomical twilight. And we would shoot every single night. And then I'm a red wine connoisseur, and I discovered this Carmarine down there that is a really cool story. If you're a wine gentleman or lady, I definitely suggest you look that up. It's one of the best wines I've ever had. But like I said, the food there was amazing. It was a really cool town. But when we were in Atacama, we had literally 7 nights where we were shooting. We were staying at, do you remember the name of it, Greg? It was like something like the Milky Way Inn or the Stars Inn or something like that.
Yeah, I can't remember the name, but yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and so it's right on the outskirts of San Pedro de Atacama. And even though they're kind of like known for all their star tours and everything else, one of the downfalls of being so close to the town was we actually did have light pollution. But again, the light pollution that we had was from a very, very small town, and we're in the middle of nowhere. Like when we flew into Calama, we thought that was the middle of nowhere, but this was really like completely desolate. And where we were at, there was a little sparse vegetation, but on the drive out there, there was not a single like sign of life anywhere. There was nothing. It was the driest, we've ever seen.
It's the driest place I've ever been to.
Yeah. We were like dying from like chapped lips and dehydration. It was definitely otherworldly out there. But here's a couple of examples of different kinds of shots that we did while we were out there in San Pedro. Greg had done this nice mosaic with the moon setting on our last night there with a 40mm lens. We were right on the edge of the country of Bolivia with this giant volcano just off in the distance, kind of overlooking everyone the entire time, which was really cool to wake up to every single morning, and the sun would rise right there. And then, Greg continued to do different mosaics while I was working on the big mosaic. So here's one with Corona Australis in the core and M8 and M12. And Greg, do you want to explain the dome shot, since this is one of the only dome shots that I got?
Yeah. I've always been kind of intrigued by being able to do these. So I started kind of practicing them a few years ago. They can be tricky because I do it. Casey was doing it the same way, but it's kind of, you have a tripod but you're freehanding it essentially. I know there's rigs out there that will like Matt that came with us, he had a rig that would automatically shoot this whole sky panorama. But essentially what I would do is start it shooting the ground with a little bit of a horizon And by looking through the finder and kind of guesstimating, essentially getting about a roughly a 25% overlap, 20%, I would shoot around the horizon and keep working my way all the way up to zenith, trying to overlap quite a bit, and then putting it into PT GUI, which we can talk about in a little bit, with the whole sky dome shots. If you ever do try it, overlap, take more photos than you think, because I've always found that I'll end up missing a small portion of the sky. And also try to catch your shoot the whole horizon first, because in the time that it takes you, depending on your exposures, I was usually doing about 30 seconds per exposure, but depending on how long it takes you to do the whole shot, I mean, things are moving according on the horizon more than you think by the time you finish. And so it can be tough to stitch the whole thing together, but we can go through that a little bit.
Yeah, so that was just kind of like a brief overview of the actual trip, but we also wanted to talk about some of the new techniques that we learned while we were there and how to go about, actually shooting in the Southern Hemisphere. Polar alignment was one of the things that we were most worried about. And, some of our other workshop attendees were using like the old fashioned method of looking through a polar scope, and Matt was trying to help them out with a laser. And there were nights where they could get it, but there was also nights where they were struggling with their star trackers and everything like that. And so Greg and I had brought the AM5s, but then I also had brought another star tracker with us. And I just picked up one of the ASIR minis beforehand, and it works with your DSLRs and everything. And you just, because you control it from your phone, it knows exactly where you're at based on GPS coordinates. And so we didn't have to use polar scopes. We didn't have to do any of that. It was probably the easiest portion of it, because like Greg and I would be, we would get back from dinner and we were set up and running and everything was planned out within 5 minutes. And we were actually going around trying to help everyone else out and get set up for the night. So while you can do it analog and manually, it's very, very hard, because there was nights where I remember trying to help them out looking towards I can't remember the constellation of this, and maybe it's Corvus or something like that, but Octans, thank you. But yeah, there's no real defined star that you can track down. It's Octans itself as a constellation is a really, really faint one. Like, it's hard to even see it even from the darkest locations. So I mean, the ASIRs just really helped us out. And then going on to PT GUI, that was one of the programs that Greg and I started messing around with on this trip, specifically for the stitching of mosaics that we could do. And so again, over here on the right is another thing that we did in PT GUI. This was actually meant to be a dome shot, but they have a feature within PT GUI called Little Planet. And so this was standing in the middle of a bunch of observatories at the Atacama Lodge that they have there. They have a whole bunch of remote observatories there as well. And then again, the arching Milky Way over Valle de la Luna, which was shot in a similar fashion, like Greg said, where you're getting the entire horizon and getting as much of the sky as you can. So real quick, just for anybody that hasn't seen PT GUI, I just wanted to demo it really quickly. So it's a fairly simple program where you basically just load in every single picture that you took. And so this is that Valle de la Luna shot that I had just showed the group, and it ended up being about 27 pictures, because by the time we got to Atacama, I had learned the hard lesson that Greg had said, and that you really want to get as much overlap or more overlap than you think you need. So this is a really cool program that's meant to do nothing but build panoramas, and it reads the EXIF data from your camera, and it can tell what kind of lens it was, what kind of camera you were shooting. And so after you drop it in, you literally just hit the create the panorama button, and a couple of minutes later, depending on how quick your machine is, it comes out with something similar to this. And so this is the first output from that Valle de la Luna shot. And you can see that because I didn't do a full 360-degree dome, I've got a big gap right here. But if I hover over, you can see how it goes about stitching each one of the panels together.
I think, Casey, I think I can still see the PowerPoint on yours.
Oh, can't see the screen?
I just see your PowerPoint.
Oh, my bad. Thank you for telling me. Let me see if I can
Yeah.
share the entire screen.
There we go. Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
So going back real quick, just as a quick recap, with PT GUI, you can just load in each one of the individual pictures. You set up the details of the shot, the side or the focal length of the lens you have, and the camera, if it's a full frame crop sensor, and then you create the panorama. One of the things that Greg and I were also experimenting with as part of these programs were importing each shot into Photoshop first and using the new AI denoising tools that they have prior to stitching everything together. And we would also tweak the color to make it more of a natural look. Can you think of anything else I'm thinking on the pre-prep, Greg?
Yeah, no, like you're exactly right. I'd put it in, and in Photoshop, I just like doing the optics calibration where it choose the lens and correct the vignetting, depending on the lens you used and the color, like you mentioned, and then you can do noise reduction and then throw it into PT GUI, and that makes a big difference as well.
Yeah. And so this is, if you've never played around with it, it's a very simple to use user interface. You literally just click on where you want to center the mosaic and you can drag it over. And as you drag the image, you can kind of see that it's trying to, in real time, almost like a real-time preview in PixInsight, create a preview of what the image is going to look like. So let's say you want to try and flatten out the horizon a little bit. You'll notice the stars at the top get really blurry as it's trying to project onto the screen what your final panorama will be.
Hey,
but
see,
you have, yeah,
going back to when you were shooting this,
yes,
were you shooting it in portrait or landscape?
I was shooting this in landscape.
Okay.
And I think you can kind of tell from the original images. So like,
Oh, okay.
yeah, they were definitely landscape images. And we actually had this debate between Greg, Matt, and I one night over dinner. And Matt, he's always just learned how to shoot it in portrait. And so he does everything in portrait. But the way that like my brain works, I just can picture it. Because again, we're doing this completely manually. We're not, measuring out everything, or we don't have a rig doing it for us. We're literally on a tripod with a bubble or a ball head and just moving it manually. And so like for me, I could just picture it better that way using it in landscape mode. So that's a great question. And then within PT GUI, like I had mentioned, it has more projections. So you can select the type of projection. It defaults to equirectangular based on the lens that you were shooting with. But you can do like the little planet version, like right there, and then it'll get your entire thing. But because again, I didn't shoot full 360, I'd have a gap on this side of it, so I probably wouldn't do a little planet. But you can see how, I'm sure you've seen, there's been several apods where you have a Milky Way arching over with a really cool foreground. But you can do like a circular fisheye, and my laptop's a little slow, so there's a bunch of different ways that you can play with stretching out the dimensions of the image to try and flatten it the best way you can. So this is just a really cool program. And again, this was one of the ones where Greg had played with this program once or twice and showed me around in it. And it's very user-friendly and easy to use. And you basically just get it to where you would like your image. So again, here I would just want to flatten out the horizon a little bit. I've got a nice arch, and I don't have crazy stretched stars at the top. So then I could export this panorama directly into Photoshop and then go through and edit it. And then you would end up so any questions on PT GUI? Has anybody ever used it besides us? No. It is a little bit of a costly program. I believe it was like $300, but if you're going to use it on mosaics and you're going to use a lot of landscape astrophotography, for me, it was worth it just on this trip alone. And I have no problem endorsing it for anybody that would want to use it for those kind of things. And then last but not least, this is the mosaic that I kept referencing. This is our massive core mosaic, and this was just a test shot within PT GUI to make sure that we had coverage before we left Chile, where this is all 62 panels. There's only 3 minutes of exposure per panel, but overall, with all the data, it's 60 hours of exposure. It's a field of view of 60 degrees by 50 degrees. The resolution, the native resolution before any kind of drizzle integration or anything like that is 5.78 arc seconds per pixel. And I think it comes out to, based on this crop right here, if we get full resolution, about 2.1 gigapixels total. So as you guys can imagine, if you've ever done mosaics or try to work with mosaics, once you get past like a 2x2 mosaic, they get a little unwieldy in terms of gradients, the amount of processing time that goes into it, the processing power that you really need. One of the things that I've discovered is that for my mosaics, I've always used AstroPixel processor, and I didn't know that there was a limit to what it could handle until I tried throwing all this in there. After calibrating everything, apparently within an AstroPixel processor, it can only process images up to 750 megapixels. And so it kept trying to downsample my entire image by almost a factor of 3. And so I stopped that because I didn't want blocky stars and be completely undersampled. And I really want to be able to have this at full resolution. But, you know, trying to go through some of the programs like PT GUI could handle it, but it only exports a JPEG. And then you can't bring a linear fits or any kind of linear image into a PixInsight or a Star Tools or whatever you're going to process it in. And so we're still contemplating how we're going to go about processing this beast, but more than likely we're going to have to use mosaic by coordinates within PixInsight, and it's a fairly tedious task as compared to something like AstroPixel processor. So something we learned by being very ambitious and trying to get this massive mosaic, but hopefully by the time that we make it back to Chile again, we'll have a nice flushed out massive mosaic that we can show you guys.
What I liked about that, even that mosaic, knowing shooting it, you know, I always have the thought in the back of my mind, like, if it's impossible to put this whole thing together and to make it look good, even just like a 4x4 2x2 mosaic, the little mosaics throughout this whole thing looked really good, as I'm sure Casey can attest to.
Yeah, and
so there's a lot of potential pictures in that mosaic.
Yeah, we can pull so many areas out of here because we have like the Dragons of Ara and the Colsag down here, you know, Royal Fucus and the Sharpless 1. We have M16, M20, M8, Corona Australis over in the corner. So like that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do this is, you know, for publishing purposes as well. We could keep pulling out small pieces of this and publish different portions of the Milky Way core, you know, on Instagram or Astrobin or anything like that for many, many moons to come.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I think we went just a little over time or right at time, but are there any questions the group might have for us?
Who's coming next time?
Casey, for your wide angle shots there, you said you used 3-minute integrations or exposure times, and those were all unguided?
the really, really wide angle shots, those were only about 30 seconds.
Oh.
The Milky Way, the core that we were doing with our Rokinons, those were the 180 seconds, and they were guided because they were on the AM5s. What I did do, what did I do with the 40 millimeter shots? Here, I'll bring them up real quick. Sorry, let me reshare the screen. So the two over here on the right, the core of the Milky Way, and then the LMC and SMC together in one shot. These were at 40 millimeters on a star tracker, and those were actually 5-minute subs untracked. Unguided. They were tracked, obviously. All I did was the polar alignment, and then I didn't have a way to kind of set up a guider on this one, so I just let them go, and I only lost like 1 or 2 shots with each one, and that was on my Star Adventure GTI after polar aligning it with ASI or Mini. So each one of these are about 2 hours with 5-minute subs.
Anyone else have questions? Comments?
I was going to say that wine you were mentioning, Wine and More has it, $8.49 a bottle.
Yes, I did discover that right after I got back. I went and checked it out. So thanks for the tip, though.
I just want to say thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, great stuff. Pictures.
Thank you.
How can we get a copy of this video if we want to go back and look at it again?
I usually post it on the Tucson Astronomy YouTube channel the next day. So if I can get around to it tomorrow, it'll be posted sometime tomorrow.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you guys for going through that, especially the planning part of it, because I think that's something that a lot of folks don't think about. You know, they have a general idea of what they want to do, but don't realize, you know, how complicated things can get.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it actually got to the point where right around night 8 or so, Greg and I were like, okay, what else do we shoot? Because we had so many clear nights, and we kind of got through that whole checklist that we just started coming up with, you know, things that we didn't think to shoot before, things that we hadn't planned on. So definitely.
Yeah, I hauled some camera gear to Peru a couple different times and never saw the sun once. So
it could go either way. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. The winter in the southern hemisphere can be kind of tricky, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You're going to put this out in a book?
The trip going to Chile, hadn't thought about it. But
all of your pictures and all the stuff you saw and took?
Yeah, I've actually thought about making like a little trip book specifically for that, just to kind of keep all the memories together. That's a great idea.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
So you still are in the process of doing the 62 panel mosaic, the final product?
Yeah.
What you showed us was just a test shot?
Yeah, that was just a test of one single sub from each panel just to make sure that we had coverage. And like I said, trying to put together a 62 panel is a lot more daunting. I mean, I knew it was going to be very, very challenging, but to even get to a point where we can process an image, putting it together is proving to be a challenge.
So that picture there is one sub per panel, but we have how many per panel? 20?
20.
Oh.
Yeah.
20. So each panel is a 20 integration. So yeah.
So you have to process those 20 for each panel and then create the sub?
Yeah.
That's what we're starting to run into. So we have masters of each, we have an integration of each one that's been fully calibrated and everything else that would basically ready to be processed from there. But now we're trying to stitch that all together in a linear state to then do like a normal processing rather than trying to do each into the individual 20 or 62 subs, because like for example, running DBE and Blur Exterminator and all that 62 times and then stitching it all together seems very, very tedious.
Sounds like a lifetime full of work.
Yeah.
That's right.
It might.
Are you using the PT GUI to assemble this, or are you using something else?
So that first test shot that we did was using PT GUI.
Okay.
The limitation that we're running into with PT GUI is that it only exports in JPEG and PNG and TIFF, but PNGs and TIFF don't have enough informational integers or something like that to where you get an error when you try to export something that large.
Oh, okay.
So again, I'm a PixInsight snob, but I'm not one to process JPEGs in PixInsight typically. So that's kind of where I ran into that. You can actually export it as a Photoshop file. It will bring it in as I think it's a PB something, like a Photoshop large file.
PNG.
No, it's not a PNG. It's something else specifically with Photoshop. But yeah, that one.
PSD.
Yeah, but then you can't get that into PixInsight to do all the other processing, and I've not processed astrophotos in Photoshop myself. So again, I think the way forward is going to be just doing everything within PixInsight and using the mosaic by coordinate scripts and that kind of stuff.
And you take advantage of containers, PixInsight containers, to do a lot of that repetitive work on all of the individual frames. I mean, this is what I did with the comet processing, right? It seems like you should be able to use containers to your benefit.
I hadn't even thought about that, Doug. That is an amazing idea.
Yeah, definitely would not have worked with all the comet stuff I did to do all of that work individual frames, but with containers, it made it manageable.
Yeah, that thought never occurred to me. I'm definitely going to write that down. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Casey, going back to the PT GUI comment, does PT GUI struggle in the linear state with subs that have less data in them than other subs, or does it do an okay job of pulling everything together?
Greg, do you want to comment on that? You've used it a little bit more than I have.
It does struggle in the linear state, right? I found that PT GUI more of like a large mosaic landscape type of thing with non-linear images. Hey, Casey?
Yeah, because I mean, it's really meant for like daytime panoramas and those types of JPEG images or raw files. So I don't think it was really meant for astro. And I did try it once, and I remember not being very impressed with the result, trying to just upload like raw fits into it.
Okay, but it sounds like based on the number of images that you have, are you stuck with it, or are there other options that you haven't thought of yet or haven't discussed?
What do you mean stuck with it?
Well, I mean, you talked about the limitations of other programs compared to the PT GUI in stitching together I think you
Sorry, I got you. No, like I said, I think I'm going to end up personally, as I'm putting it together, I'm going to use PixInsight for all of it. PT GUI is a great tool, and you could potentially go through and edit each individual master, stretch, get to the point where you would stretch each individual of the 62 files and then export that into PT GUI and then use PT GUI to stitch it. And then because you're in the nonlinear state, then it does much better with nonlinear data. So I think it would be possible to use PT GUI in that way, but it just depends on how you want to approach it. And it may end up being one of the ways that we try to do it. It's just, we're kind of in that beginning stages of just trying to figure out a method forward with the mosaic.
Gotcha. Good luck with that.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, that's interesting. Have you thought about making mini mosaics and then patching them together?
Yeah, I have thought about that. I tried it where I was going to do 4 panels and then like within APP, and then use PixInsight to stack it all together. And when I tried it, I was running into a problem where AstroPixel processor was distorting the projection of them. And so when you try to do the last stitch together, it didn't quite work. So I thought about doing smaller ones, and I haven't gotten to that point yet. I kind of ran out of time. One of the things I didn't mention during the presentation is Greg and I came back with about 500 gigabytes worth of data to process. In all of our Milky Way shots and the wide field shots and the other shots that we did besides the mosaic. So every time I get a little frustrated with trying something on the mosaic, I end up processing another data set from, you know, what we had ended up taking. And we still have more that hasn't seen the light of day yet.
Good problem to have.
Yeah, very good problem to have. And we have the wide field rig producing images in Chile as well as the CDK-17 now. So we've got a lot of data that's coming in, and haven't, you know, time is now the problem.
Oh, that reminds me. I wanted to ask about, I couldn't remember the question I wanted to ask, but when you mentioned that you stuck another rig on top of, you know, you piggybacked basically, and you ran 2 instances of Nina, I wondered if you might speak to that just a little bit, because I think, you know, a couple of us in the club are going to have new mounts soon, and we won't have to guide anymore, but I was thinking I could turn my guider into a wide field camera. So I don't quite understand the process of how you have 2 imaging trains, if you will, on top of the same Nina instance. Can you speak to that, how you set that up just a little bit? Because you've only got one mount.
I guess to clarify that,
Yeah.
only the wide field runs on Nina, and the 17 runs on ACP and some other programs. So that's kind of the trick there. So basically the big rig is running the show, and then I just turn on the wide field rig, and in Nina, I essentially just connect the camera and the focuser.
Okay, so you're not connected to the mount. You're not using a mount simulation or anything like that.
So Nina's like, you haven't connected the telescope mount and stuff.
Great.
I'm like, that's fine.
So you're just controlling the shutter, basically, the shutter and the focuser.
Yeah.
Okay, terrific.
And Doug, we had thought about running simultaneous instances of Nina or other programs like that, but this was the simplest solution that we came across. And we also thought that we were going to lose subs based on the dithering, but because the disparity in the resolution and the focal lengths of the 2 systems, we've not run across that problem. It's such that the wide field rig has the sampling size of the wide field rig is such that we don't even notice a dither.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, lots of good information there. I've got a couple of announcements at the end here. Next month, the meeting will be on November 20th. That's the Monday right before Thanksgiving. So you can put that on your calendar. And I'm going to share my screen here for just a second. Can everybody see that? So on the November the 18th, which is a Saturday, we're going to have our hands-on workshop at the Oro Valley Library. And these are the topics that we're going to try to cover during the workshop. These are the topics that were the results of the survey that we sent out a couple weeks back, maybe a month back or so. So we went through those survey responses and picked out the ones that had the most interest, and these were the topics that seemed to be of most general interest. So these will all be presented in 45-minute chunks by some of the imagers in our own group. So it'll be kind of a hands-on discussion, and the hands-on discussion procedure. And the idea, of course, is you can bring your own data if you want to try to process it and follow along, or there will be some data provided by the discussion leaders for those who don't have data, for example, that they might want to dump into mosaics or something like that. So I'm looking forward to seeing everybody on November the 18th at the Oro Valley Library. The library opens at 10 o'clock in the morning, and we're hoping to get started by about 10:30 with the first half hour, so for everybody to kind of get in and get their laptops set up, etc. So put that in your calendar as well, and if you're in the Tucson area, you're welcome to join us for the hands-on workshop. And even if you're not in the Tucson area, you're welcome to join us. Any other comments or questions? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Casey and Greg, for sharing your trip details with us. I'll try to post this recording as soon as possible tomorrow so that everybody can go back and review some of the important stuff that we went over.
All right. Thank you for having us.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.